side, and Vicky Foxcroft, and who was the second?
It was Nick Smith.
And Vicky Foxcroft and Nick Smith, both Labour frontbenchers. So that will clearly be a fairly straightforward clash now, presided over by the two-party machines, but with the other parties falling in beside their respective allies in all this. And I think it's pretty much the Conservatives' official line, plus everybody else in terms of other parties on the other side, minus a few Labour rebels. And this is going to be one of the really interesting things about this vote. There was a lot of talk that some Labour MPs who supported Brexit or who were representing very pro-Brexit seats from the referendum might decide to back the Prime Minister's deal. A few of them announced their intention to do so in the course of the debate today. So it'll be interesting to see how many more there are. Are there some sort of submarine Brexiteers who are now going to have to surface and hoist their true colours?
Yes, I mean, if you look at the state of the parties in the House at the moment, the Conservatives have 317 MPs. So we'll be looking at how the numbers stack up against that figure. We'll have to be looking at when the voting results are published, how many the Brexiteers obviously opposed it. We'll also be looking to see how many on the Labour benches also decided to vote with the government motion. There were a few in the last week or so during the debate who've announced that they are thinking of doing so. Most recently, an eminent backbencher, Kevin Barron. So we'll have to look and see how what the swap, if you like, between the parties is. Interestingly, also, it'd be interesting to look at. There's 8 independent MPs at the moment. Quite a high number. Yes, and most of them predominantly Labour MPs who have either resigned or lost the whip for a variety of reasons. Some matters of principle, difficulties with their local constituency parties. Some of them have lost it as a result of misbehaviour or perceived misbehaviour, allegations of misbehaviour in the sexual harassment and bullying scandals that have beset Parliament in the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see whether they turn out and whether they vote and whether they follow the whip. And some of them have not been turning up in recent weeks, so we'll have to look at what those numbers look like.
Indeed, I suppose there's quite a complicated calculus because there are defections from the official party line on all sides. We've already mentioned that there are some Labour Brexiteers or Labour Brexit supporters who say that they may not have voted that way, but they now have to honour the result of the referendum. But equally on the Conservative side, you have a slightly unusual situation in a way, because there are people who are very, very pro-Brexit who don't like this Brexit deal that Theresa May has put together because it doesn't secure the objectives they wanted. And there are people who are pro-Remain, and both of them can at least agree that they don't want this deal, and so they can vote to reject this deal. Oh, there's even one former Liberal Democrat, Stephen Lloyd from the Eastbourne constituency, who isn't towing the Liberal Democrat party line on this and is saying he was likely to vote in favour of the deal.
Yes, and the Liberal Democrats, of course, are the most Remain pro-EU party in the House at the moment. They only have 11 MPs, so obviously losing one of your numbers when you're so small in number is a big loss. But as you say, we're seeing sort of alignments across party lines, which will make figuring out exactly who's voted which way until we see the actual published numbers quite difficult.
Yes, indeed. There's now a wonderful app provided by the Commons that gives you a full breakdown of the votes rather more rapidly than they used to emerge, but it'll still be quite a while after this vote is done before those facts and figures are actually available to us. In the meantime, though, the chamber's beginning to fill up again. You can see MPs beginning to return to their seats, and of course in the foreground Tulip Siddiq, concealed at the moment behind the figure of the Labour MP Clive Lewis in her wheelchair there. Once again, having gone through the division lobbies, I think possibly almost first in the queue, I would suspect. Meanwhile, as I say, the chamber filling up again. It's very difficult to guess what the numbers are voting either way, just from the way MPs file back in, because there are so many different routes in and out of the Commons chamber that you can't say, oh, if they're coming out of that door, they voted in a certain way. What you tend to watch for on these occasions is the faces of the respective sides. Unfortunately, the front benches are a little bit far away to judge that at the moment. But when we get closer pictures, perhaps we'll be able to see a bit of body language of triumph or defeat in due course. I don't think Theresa May's yet re-entered the chamber, although I think I can just about detect the head of the Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, on the government front bench there. And the leading Brexiteer, Sir John Redwood, just taking his seat in the back benches now. But I suppose the upshot of this vote is that the government and indeed the opposition parties will have a much clearer handle on how many of their MPs are prepared to break the party whip over Brexit, because Brexit runs so far across party lines. It's one of the real reasons why the Westminster system has found this so difficult to handle. The normal Labour versus Conservative alignments don't hold for the whole issue of leaving or staying in the European Union. Labour MPs represent very Brexity and very Remainy seats, and similarly on the Conservative side, and that means that there's a sort of automatic fissure running across the parties.
Yes, and ironically, the former Brexit Secretary, when he was in the Cabinet at the end of last year, he actually suggested to the House of Commons Procedure Committee that the government should change the amendment process so that they could get this clean vote on the government's motion. His proposals were not accepted as it happened, but in the end today, with the decision by the opposition and the SNP to withdraw their amendments and Edward Lee not to press his, we are getting that clean vote. So as you say, it means that Theresa May tonight and everybody else will know exactly what the level of support is for her deal. If the majority against it is not as big as many had thought, then she may well have another go. I think it will also be, the European Union will be looking at this and seeing, is this a Prime Minister that can get a deal through? Is the arithmetic working in her direction or not? And that will affect, I think, what they are thinking and what they may say in response if she wants to go back to Brussels for any concessions.
And of course Brussels will be watching this as well. Brussels will be making its own calculations about whether the Prime Minister will be able to get a deal through Parliament on the basis of the figures that will emerge from tonight's vote. So if not the world, certainly the European Commission will be watching closely tonight.
Yes, and the closer it is, if they think that this is a Prime Minister that can possibly get this through on a second go, they might be willing to make some concessions or to do something.
We're just hearing that Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the Commission, will be making a statement after the vote with no exact time yet, but it's presumed to be this evening.
Yes, and we'll have to see immediately after the results are announced. We would expect probably the Prime Minister to say something. It'd be pretty extraordinary if she didn't, for her to just get up out of her chair, walk out of the chamber. We may or may not have a response from the Leader of the Opposition, depending upon what she says. I understand Jean-Claude Juncker has flown back from an earlier meeting to be in Brussels to make the statement tonight, and so he's changed his diary. And as you said, not just people here in the United Kingdom that are watching this, but all around the world.
Yes, indeed. And, the vote looks as if it's edging ever closer now. The chamber's almost filled right up again, but no sign yet of those tellers who'll be able to give the government the numbers on the vote, and will they be announcing it at the table, I imagine, fairly shortly.
Yeah, viewers might think it looks fairly chaotic. It's worth perhaps saying that every MP does not have their own seat in the chamber, unlike many other parliaments, legislatures around the world.
It's closer to 400 than the full 650, isn't it?
It is. So on big set-piece occasions like this, members, sit in the stairwells. They crowd round, as you can see, in the entrance to the chamber, waiting to hear the results. And it all looks slightly chaotic. And actually, the chamber is actually much smaller when you're physically in it. It's much smaller than many people anticipate.
Yes, and
so
you're jammed in very, very tightly on those benches, like sardines in a tin.
It is, yeah.
And I don't think it will be very comfortable for very long, because even though it's a very lofty room, the chamber does get quite hot with all those people sitting in it for a prolonged period of time. Now I think that's Wendy Morton appearing again, the first sight of a teller.
She's walked past the table, so we're not clear what the situation might be.
The minor parties, incidentally, as that's a slightly dismissive phrase that's used in Commons jargon, the minor parties, in this case the Scottish Nationalists, are the third biggest party in the House, and they're sitting immediately on the right of your picture, closer to as it were, closer to the viewer, further away from the speaker, on the front couple of benches there. Behind them are the Liberal Democrats, the Green MP, Dr. Caroline Lucas, the Northern Ireland Democratic Unionists, sort of mixed together in a slightly ad hoc way in the benches behind, with Labour MPs spreading out into the back benches behind that. Of course, the opposition is on the right-hand side benches of your picture. The government benches are on the left-hand side behind Theresa May and her cabinet ministers. So we can now see the tellers beginning to assemble in front of the table here, and the government tellers, Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart, are sort of edging towards the government side of the chamber in a way that almost looks as if they're taking a position to announce that they've lost, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. As you can tell, the expectant hum. This is one of those big Commons occasions where the atmosphere becomes absolutely electric, partly because there are just so many people jammed in. It always produces a tension of its own.
Could also add, in terms of the seating, that in front of the speaker, viewers will be able to see 3 people sat at a table. They are the clerks who advise the Speaker on procedure, engage with members about procedural matters, they keep check on time and so on. The most senior clerk, as we look at the picture, the most senior clerk is David Nartzler. He sits at the left-hand side, and then you have 2 other clerks.
And here we go.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes, order. The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. On a point of order. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
Order. There's no good people shouting. There will be an opportunity for other points of order, but the Prime Minister must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Those whose jobs rely on our trade with the EU need that clarity. So, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to set out briefly how the government intends to proceed. First, we need to confirm whether this government still enjoys the confidence of the House. I believe that it does, but given the scale and importance of tonight's vote, it's right that others have the chance to test that question if they wish to do so. I can therefore confirm that if the official opposition table a confidence motion this evening in the form required by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, the government will make time to debate that motion tomorrow. And if, as happened before Christmas, the official opposition declined to do so, we will, on this occasion, consider making time tomorrow to debate any motion in the form required from the other opposition parties, should they put one forward. Second, if the House confirms its confidence in this government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Third, if these meetings yield such ideas, the government will then explore them with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by offering two reassurances. The first is to those who fear that the government's strategy is to run down the clock to the 29th of March. That is not our strategy. I've always believed that the best way forward is to leave in an orderly way with a good deal, and have devoted much of the last 2 years negotiating such a deal. As you confirmed, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the business motion tabled last week by my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield, is not legally binding, but the government respects the will of the House. We will therefore make a statement about the way forward and table an amendable motion by Monday. The second reassurance is to the British people who voted to leave the European Union in the referendum 2.5 years ago. I became Prime Minister immediately after that referendum. I believe it's my duty to deliver on their instruction, and I intend to do so. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the government to do just that.